Hi, I'm Sam Lovejoy, and I live on Chestnut Hill in Montague, Massachusetts, and I'm just an organic farmer.
Light is not a bulb, a bird is not a plane. Sometimes things get so tangled, they need some dumb refrain, such as a light is not a bulb, and a bird is not a plane. And if it's wet, it might be rain.
How did you happen to become an organic farmer?
Well, when I was 6 years old, I moved to Wilbraham, Massachusetts, which is about 50 miles south of here on the Connecticut Valley. And I started working for an apple and peach farmer at that time, and I worked for him for probably 11 years, from the time I was 6 until junior year in high school. So it only seemed natural that after college I'd end up being a farmer. And organic just has to do with consciousness of the food we eat.
Energy, energy, oh my God, why can't they see? They just wrap it up to sell it like their souls. When there's no more to be stolen, things might once again start rolling, and we'll end up where we'd always thought we'd be.
What was your first reaction to seeing the NU Tower?
I turned to you and told me we're going to have to tip it over, or someone was going to have to. No, I pointed out to you that I thought it was distinctly the symbol which was probably going to have to get removed in order to get a movement going here in the valley, to stop the nuke.
Symbol of what?
Oh, the symbol of the nuclear power plant.
Light is not a bulb, bird is not a plane. Sometimes things get so tangled that they need some dumb refrain, such as light is not a bulb, a bird is not a plane, and if it's wet, I hope it's rain.
I just thought that it was so obvious and so symbolic and just stuck up there so succinctly that I just knew it would end up tipping over. And then by December 28th, when they announced the plant and no one had done it, and by February 22nd, and yet still no one had done it, and we had never gotten really any kind of movement off the ground to stop the plant in the local area, I just figured it was time. And I figured I was more than within my rights by that time, because I was sure I knew enough that I could rightfully claim its unlawfulness.
In August of 1945, the great power hidden in the tiny atom was demonstrated to the world. It killed some 300,000 people and left many more scarred and crippled by scorching radiation. Albert Einstein had worked closely for years with the US government's Manhattan Project, a research program to develop the bomb that would end the war. After the bomb was dropped, he wrote to a friend, "Our representatives depend ultimately on decisions made in the village square. To the village square we must carry the facts of atomic energy. From there must come America's voice." In 1953, President Eisenhower suggested to the United Nations that the world turn its attention to the development of what he called the peaceful atom, the conversion of this awesome power into electricity by means of the nuclear power reactor.
You know, one makes errors at various times, and in the first blush of enthusiasm about this remarkable source of power after World War II and the awesome power of the bomb, everybody said, "Isn't it marvelous that we have this source of power? And now if we just use it for peaceful purposes, it'll be excellent." And one of the things that characterizes free enterprise is that they look ahead and they say, what are the things I ought to invest my money in? And some awfully big people and some awfully big interests invested in uranium and the future of atomic power. And unfortunately, their view is we've got to recover our investment no matter what happens to the public, you know, it's terribly important to conserve dollars before life. Right. And that's how they have to look at it. It's too bad if somebody gets hurt in the process, but after all, they do have millions and billions invested in nuclear power and the uranium industry.
Through the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon years, billions of federal and utility dollars were poured into the research and development of the peaceful atom. As the investment grew, so did the stake of the economy in the nuclear experiment. Today there are 55 commercial reactors in operation, representing a capital investment of more than $15 billion, with $110 billion more pledged to plants under construction or in the planning stage.
Our company, Northeast Utilities, has been in the development and construction and safe operation of nuclear power plants since the early 1950s, which makes us in this program for almost 20 years, and as I indicated, without any fatalities, without any accidents. On our system today, 37% of the power that's being consumed by our customers is being generated by nuclear means. The original projections for the light water reactor program was that there would be 1,000 nuclear power plants in this country by the year 2000.
Fifth, I'm asking the Atomic Energy Commission to speed up the licensing and construction of nuclear plants. We must seek to reduce the time required to bring nuclear plants online, nuclear plants that can produce power, to bring them online from 10 years to 6 years, reduce that time lag.
Einstein's hope of 1946 seemed to be slipping further and further from reality. By the 1970s, the specter of nuclear power had become the pawn of financial games in the United States and of complex political battles between nations. In his first State of the Union speech, President Gerald Ford asked that 200 new plants be completed within 10 years. In December of 1973, Northeast Utilities announced that they had selected Montague, Massachusetts as the site for a twin nuclear power plant to cost $1.5 billion. The proposed plant would be one of the largest ever constructed, producing over 2,000 megawatts and cooling its reaction with two 600-foot high cooling towers and 20 million gallons of water every day from the river. Several groups of ecology-minded people began to raise objections to the plant, eventually coalescing into an umbrella organization called Nuclear Objectives for a Pure Environment.
Well, the main objections are, first, the health factor, which is the low-level radiation, which is so dangerous over a long period of time to the environment, to people, animals, and to the land. Especially the objection was the watershed, that the Montague Plains is a beautiful and delicate ecological asset. It's an aquifer, a natural filter for the Connecticut River, so that any leaks or any radioactivity loose on the Montague aquifer would affect the whole Connecticut River Valley. We're also really worried about that much radioactivity concentrated in one place. Any accident would pollute the whole area. So that's the safety problem there of an accident. We're also concerned about the storage of radioactive waste, transportation of radioactive waste.
The radicals were the first people to run around the country and say the war is bad, whereas this nuclear power plant movement, anti-nuclear movement in the country, has every range of American involved with it. And you know, liberals, conservatives, they're worried about nuclear power plants killing people in their area. And so it's a localized issue all around the country. It's not a nationwide program yet, but it's getting made nationwide. And what's happening is the environmental movement, the whole ecology movement, and all these different segments of society that are fighting the No Nukes campaign are all starting to become politicized, and they're starting to realize that there's a capitalist dialectic forcing nukes to be built in this country, that there's no other way to draw the lines, no other way to define it. And so the Montague nuclear power plant will not be built, and I can claim that as a person who is feeling that he's talking from the right side, capital R right, in saying that Sam Lovejoy will not allow that plant to be built, and there are other people that agree with him, and they will have to build that plant over my body. And it's going to get to the point where all these other factions all over the country are going to start to realize that the only way that they can stop those nuclear power plants all over their area is certain kinds of political action, direct action, saying no, in a concrete way, no plant.
The most complex and delicate technology developed for the reactor is the control mechanism. This is necessary to prevent the fission reaction occurring in the reactor's core from getting out of hand. Although no one is sure just what would happen if such a meltdown were to occur, it is certain that incredible heat would be generated and the possible radioactive release would be catastrophic.
I don't believe potentially it's very dangerous. I think it's a question of probabilities. There have been a great many numbers bandied about in prior years that if anything happened to a nuclear plant, well, it would spread for miles and kill thousands and thousands of people. I just don't believe that. I just don't see any evidence for that.
In 1957, the Atomic Energy Commission conducted a study investigating the possible consequences of a nuclear reactor accident and subsequent release of radioactivity. The results of this study indicated that a maximum credible accident could result in thousands of square miles of destruction, killing as many as 3,400 people and injuring 43,000.
First place, if the worst of all possible accidents were to happen, and the odds against that are very great, even if it were to happen, there are a great many things that could be done to contain it. It probably would be contained on site. I doubt very much if it would have a widespread effect.
When we're talking about a mass of 100 tons or so of material melting 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit with water around, with hydrogen being generated and burning explosively, melting through concrete into soil, when somebody tells me, but we're sure it isn't going to go far away, I look at them as a chemist and I say I have heard various forms of insanity, but hardly this form. So I don't really know whether the chance is 1 in 10 or 1 in 100 or 1 in 10,000 as to whether 20% of the radioactivity will get 30 miles away. And who's going to define what the chance is that this molten mass at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit is or isn't going to do something? When we don't have the need to get this, why do we want to put every city and hamlet of the United States at risk by building 1,000 of these plants? We can get the power from sunshine very easily and economically. It just makes no sense. But I would like to say that even if this hazard of a meltdown were securely answered, it doesn't alter for 1 second my opposition to nuclear power, because I'm concerned about the fact that whether it melts down or doesn't melt down, you've created an astronomical amount of radioactive garbage, which you must contain and isolate better than 99.99% perfectly for the future, and in the future I mean forever. Do you know, or would you predict, that humans will do something 99.99% perfectly in peace and war, with human error and human malice, guerrilla activity, psychotics, malfunction of equipment? Do you believe that there's anything you'd like to guarantee will be done 99.99% perfectly for 100,000 years?
NOPE publicly stated its belief that the plant would never be built, but the opposition within Montague was small and isolated. Outside the town, there seemed little awareness that the plant was even being planned. Meanwhile, NU began the preparation of its site on the Montague Plains. By June of 1973, they had constructed a 500-foot steel tower to test weather conditions. It was ironically not the decisions about nuclear power, but the plants themselves that had moved to the villages of America.
Well, the function of the tower is to measure the wind speed, wind direction, temperature, and dew point. And this is done at 4 different elevations above ground elevation. It will enable us to make some predictions regarding the design and location of the plant, regarding the allowable normal radioactive emissions through our stacks in the plants, and what will happen to these as they leave the stacks. I would imagine that some of this information could be utilized as far as our evacuation plan is concerned to predict under certain weather conditions which way the radioactive emissions would be moving and how fast they would be moving.
In the early morning darkness of February 22nd, Sam Lovejoy slipped onto the plains and sabotaged the weather tower simply by loosening the guy wires that held it up. He flagged down a car and rode to the local police station, where he turned himself in. Lovejoy submitted a 4-page written statement which explained his act, citing the Declaration of Independence and accusing both the government and the utility companies of despotism. He was soon indicted by a grand jury for willful and malicious destruction of personal property. He pleaded absolutely not guilty and announced that he would handle his own defense.
God. I mean, I walked in there, and it was one of the quietest, clearest, cold nights. It was just crisp. There was not a sound in the air. And when I walked up to the tower with its strobe light blinking on and off, it was like lighting the entire area. It was like I could see everything clearly for a split second, then darkness for a split second, then light for a split second. It was hypnotic. I went over to the farthest turnbuckle and I measured it up a little bit, and then I just set to work. And it took me about 45 minutes to get the first one undone. It was a lot of work, actually. And very carefully, I got it down to about an inch from the end where it was just about to pop off. And then I very carefully stuck my crowbar in at an angle so that in case the thing took off, it wouldn't take my wrist with it. So I was like being incredibly careful, and I was twisting it. And suddenly it just let go. Boom, without notice. It made this like double whanging noise that carried up the cable. It repeated it twice, like whang, whang. And then the steel cable and the shock wave hit the top of the tower. And the tower being solid steel, the noise then echoed down through the tower to the ground. And in addition to that, by then the cable had decided to start whapping around the tower. And the noise and the amplification of the noise and steel on steel and everything, it was so noisy out on the Montague Plains there for about a minute, I'm surprised the entire Montague didn't wake up. So then I was paranoid. I sat down really quiet, making sure no one was coming. Pulled out a cigarette, smoked a cigarette, and nobody came. So then I said, oh, it's clean sailing. This is ridiculous. So then I just undid the next 2 turnbuckles. The second one let go, and it didn't fall over. And I said, great. And the third one let go. And the tower, I thought that I first observed the tower like move just a little bit. And then it seemed to move back. And I said to myself, well, it's not going, and that's beautiful, because now I might be able to knock over the whole thing. That was a real question in my mind about whether it was conceivable that the thing would have enough structural integrity to fall as a unit, like it didn't. And as I just thought that I was going to have the chance to do that 4th turnbuckle, it swayed for the last time, and it just started to go, and then it just disintegrated in midair, just kind of crumbled down into pieces on the ground with this incredible, giant, crashing noise. And I felt a little let down because I realized I hadn't knocked down the whole thing. But then I said to hell with it, because the symbolic thing had happened that I wanted to take place.
Although Lovejoy was seen as a simple terrorist by many, his action represented the feelings of thousands of citizens who had been mobilized by a growing concern about the safety and necessity of nuclear power plants. Locally, the plant was no longer an abstract issue. In the fall 1974 elections, the Alternate Energy Coalition sponsored a referendum in the state Senate district encompassing Montague and the surrounding towns. 48% of the voters cast their ballots in opposition to the Montague plant.
I don't think I'd make a judgment as to whether the yes or a no vote would have any major impact on the outcome of whether that plant is built or not. It seems to me that society has to go forward. And I use the analogy of the railroads in the 1840s in this country, that there would be no railroads built if one town could, one or a group of towns could block the line.
Radioactivity cannot be seen or otherwise detected by the 5 human senses. Nuclear scientists admit that there is much they do not know about the effects of radioactivity, but they are aware that minute doses can cause cancer, leukemia, genetic damage, and thus birth defects. Dr. Goffman has estimated that if every American were to receive the maximum dose of radiation allowed by the AEC, there would be an additional 32,000 deaths per year from cancer alone.
The decision to build nuclear power plants may very well be, for the first time, a decision that can result in the desecration of the earth with respect to life for all future generations. And if any decision requires profound consideration and the most intensive public study and debate, I would think it is that decision.
Early in 1975, Henry Kissinger announced that a second oil embargo by the Arabs might be considered a strangulation of America and require military seizure of the oil fields. Energy had become a very serious business. The cries of danger from hundreds of nuclear scientists and millions of frightened Americans carried little weight in what had become a national security issue, America's need for energy.
Supposing there were a natural gas shortage in this country, or supposing the coal deposits were not developed as rapidly as we think they might be, or coal gasification came, supposing the Arabs were to shut off oil again and our foreign sources were insecure again, well, then you might see a very rapid shift to electricity, and the growth would be beyond what it has been in the past. On the other hand, with conservation, with an energy ethic, it could be less. I think the devilish thing is that we just don't know. It's better to plan, however, that you have facilities in place when you need them and have an excess than it is to have an undersupply, because that means a disaster for the economy, for jobs, employment.
Let us set as our national goal, in the spirit of Apollo, with the determination of the Manhattan Project, that by the end of this decade, we will have developed the potential to meet our own energy needs without depending on any foreign energy sources.
Franklin County and Hampshire County are at the south slope of the foothills of the Berkshire Mountains, and has been known to be the most conservative district in all of Massachusetts, and has also been known as one of the most depressed areas in all of America. But it's funny, because the first time that a big project was proposed for Montague was when Boston decided to dump its garbage on the Montague Plains. The citizens of the town sort of went through an ego shock and decided that the Montague Plains shouldn't be used for Boston's garbage. And so what they did in order to stop this was to pick on the environment as the reason to stop it. And they said that the Montague Plains was a unique ecological area, which it is. It turns out that it's about 1,900 square acres of what's called an aquifer, or a sandy filter, and it was estimated in a report written during the dump fight times that up to a quarter of the Connecticut River's entire water supply filters through the Montague Plains, and therefore this aquifer concept. In addition to that, you have thousands upon thousands of people's wells always using water filtered by the Montague Plains, because the Montague Plains water table is the source of most of the water for most of the valley itself. So the dump project was dropped, and the B&M Railroad were in no position to do anything with this land that they owned on the Montague Plains. So it was perfect in the late winter, maybe early spring of 1972-73, Northeast Utilities started to make these hints that Montague was being looked at as a possible site for a nuclear power plant, of course, thinking that they could just attach themselves to about 1,900 acres of undeveloped land within a mile of the Connecticut River, which served all their purposes.
Well, it was a basic screening of I guess as many as 300 potential locations, most of them ruled out very quickly, and we got down to some 5 or 6 sites. Montague seems to have good bedrock. We can build away from the underground water. It has make-up water for cooling towers from the Connecticut River. We think can be used judiciously and not to damage the ecosystem of the river. It has good rail access to it to actually physically build the plant, and it's relatively near the major transmission lines which form the grid in New England. So to that extent, it seems to be a very, very fine site.
So we have the utilities being one of the biggest employers, an unemployment rate somewhere between 12 and 15% in the area. About the only organized force of workers in the area are the Construction Trades Council, and they're looking for jobs so badly that they'll work at any possible job handed to them. And you're more or less put in the position of a depressed area being offered a giant construction project in which the only way these people can respond is to say, God, we need jobs, and therefore we're going to have to take the nuclear power plant.
Well, would you like to see the nuclear plant built?
No. Oh,
no.
Yes, I would.
You would?
Yes, I would.
Why would you like to see it built here?
Well, I suppose we need it.
You mean
It'd be nice.
You need the power?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Do you think the power plant should be built here?
Sure, why
Yeah.
not, yeah.
Why?
Absolutely.
Are you worried about leakage from the power plant?
No, they should have it here.
They should.
That's right.
Why? Because you need the power?
Yes, we need plenty of it.
You know, nuclear power hasn't been really proven, you know. There's other powers, I believe, that they could use better, you know. It's like, I don't know why, but they're just not developing it, you know. For some reason. Maybe it's because it's not that much profit in their pocket, you know.
Do you think the plant should be built here?
That's absolutely.
You do?
Yeah, why not? Who's going to stop them?
Well,
you got money enough behind you to push it?
There are a lot of people who are opposed to it, sir.
Yeah, opposed to it, but the hell, they haven't got nothing behind them to push it.
You mean they have no political base?
No, they haven't got the finance to push it.
They don't have the money?
That's right.
And the big...
If you got the money, all right. If you haven't...
So sometime in the early spring, you started to have these strange meetings occurring between Northeast Utilities and the selectmen and some of the bigger powers in the town. So much so that it got to be to the point where the newspapers, who were actually pro-nuclear at the time, were actually running editorials saying whining and dining and secret sessions with the selectmen just don't make it. And you've got this incredible scene where when they're talking about the Montague as one of the sites, they were also talking about huge tax breaks, which more or less come down to a bribe. They actually said that the tax rate would be 1/10 of what it is now, more or less bribing the people in the town to vote for a nuclear power plant just to get the tax cut.
Do you think of that as sort of a bribe situation?
No, we don't. In fact, in all of our meetings with the town officials, we've always played down, not played down, but did not feel that the tax break or the large tax base that would come from the plant was not the reason why they should elect to have a plant in their town.
I mean, it's sort of hard to sum up Northeast Utilities because they're sort of this amorphous group. It's just a holding company of sort of big mucky executives that sort of think that they're deciding the future of the energy needs of America their own way based on profit. And I just don't look at the needs of America as being based on profit. I think they're based on need and on what's available, necessity.
I think you weigh the evidence. I don't think it's a numbers game. You try to evaluate different opinions. You try to judge the background of the individual expressing an opinion about it. You try to weed out those who are perhaps anti-technology anyway. They'd be as much against an electric toothbrush, if you will, as they would be against nuclear power plants. It's a lifestyle with them. You have to, I think, take that, their opinions into some context. You have to weigh that against the great body of scientific knowledge in Western civilization, which pretty much has put an imprimatur on nuclear power, certainly in France, certainly in England, Russians now.
When electric utility companies use their funds to put advertisements in national newspapers and magazines stating that nuclear power is safe, in the face of considerable question in high scientific engineering circles that it is not safe, the effort to influence the public mind by the use of money and the media and the press without an open ability to debate that issue, that is a conspiracy. In spite of the profound character of the decision that has to be made, public debate has not even begun. And indeed, the very authorities, both governmental and industry, involved in making this decision have simply prevented that public information process from occurring.
Well, after I had studied the whole concept of nuclear power and its dangers and the catastrophe that it would mean on the health level to all the citizens of the town and the area, and the consequences of a catastrophic accident and all the rest of it, all throwing it all into a giant kitty, then I decided I had to hunt around for some recourse, some way that I could stop this disaster from occurring in my area and maybe stop it all across the country or the world. So I started to look at recourse. And there's only two main recourses available due to the fact that the Atomic Energy Commission preempted all regulation on the state level. And that is that they've set up this thing called citizens' limited appearance interventions and what's called a legal general intervention. And they're somewhat different in that the general intervention costs somewhere between $75,000 and $100,000, and you hire lawyers and bring in experts and try and compete with the Atomic Energy Commission on its own rules. Whereas the Atomic Energy Commission is making the rules, and it comes out like a kangaroo court. They make the rules, and then they decide whether they like what you're talking about. The limited appearance is a one-shot deal. The citizen walks in, speaks for 5 minutes to the regulatory board, and they decide whether all these little petty issues that you supposedly raised in untechnical terms are going to convince them that a nuclear power plant is bad when obviously they think they're just dynamite.
As long as the process is working, that I can get to the newspapers, that I can appear on in a film and say what I want to say, or I can go to an AEC hearing, that I can band together and get with my fellows to express my point of view, whether it's on the Vietnam War or detente or nuclear power. As long as that process is reasonably open, and I think it is reasonably open in the United States, then I have to be fairly confident about the future.
The thing that convinced me the most that the whole intervention process was totally ridiculous was when I went to a speech given by a man who had worked for 6 years in an intervention process to stop a nuclear power plant just over the border here in Vernon, Vermont. And the end result of his 6 years of working to stop the Vernon nuclear power plant, the end result was him claiming to the people he was speaking to that night that it was his belief that nothing would stop nuclear power development in America except a giant catastrophe. And when I looked at him and I realized that that was 6 years of educated frustration saying that there was no recourse, there was no way to stop it, and the only way to stop it was a disaster, killing thousands upon thousands of people, I knew that I was right in tipping over the tower and at least trying to just raise the issue to the local people and say, we can't have a disaster.
When the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission announces that it is going to hold open public hearings on the safety of emergency core cooling systems, and then in advance of those hearings issues a written directive to its scientists never disagree with established policy on safety, this is a conspiracy to obstruct the truth that the hearing process is supposed to bring out. There is no other term for the obstruction of truth in the hearing process by direction and by threat of its employees than conspiracy. I think the evidence will show that there is far more there than what has recently come to be known as the Watergate scandals. With respect to the citizen, There, I think, is an unwritten law beyond things like the Declaration of Independence, which speak of our inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I'd like to raise the question, when even a government or even a majority vote does things that may poison an individual, may poison his children and his children's children, is he not entitled to some effort to defend his rights to life, his children's rights, and their descendants, no matter what the Democratic majority has decided, particularly when the Democratic majority has made such a decision, if they have, based upon the perversion of truth, the purchasing of truth with money and advertisement and vested interests.
So my frustration at the concept of recourse was paramount. There is no recourse. And so then I had to decide how to approach the tower as the symbol in the most effective way to communicate a giant political issue to the local residents of the town and to the county and to the whole Connecticut River Valley area, how I could communicate to them the dangers, the issue of nuclear power and the dangers of nuclear power and the whole problem of nuclear power as a giant political issue when no one was looking at it. And so I decided that, one, I had to knock down the tower, and yet, two, I had to realize that the people around here, one, don't realize that they do have recourse, but the recourse isn't necessarily through the established means, because sometimes the established means just don't work and the odds are totally against you. Yet I did not want the people in the area to get hung up on the property issue and the whole concept that someone would destroy property in order to stop a nuclear power plant or anything else. So what I wanted to do was get these people to think about the issue itself, nuclear power plants, and therefore I would put my existence on the line and just turn myself in with what I thought was a well thought out statement, and people would then realize that I was being responsible.
I think he should have been in jail.
Yeah?
Why not?
There's a rope around his neck.
How do you think that the power plant should still be built?
That ain't got nothing to do with the goddamn power plant. The idea he spoiled $76,000 that the goddamn town people got to pay for. That's when you want to look at it. I know, I worked up in Vernon.
That's been closed down too, hasn't it?
Well, they're just repairing something. They close it down and they find flaws. You buy a new car, you have trouble with it. What's it?
Yeah. What did you do for them at
I was a steam fitter up there.
Excuse me, a what?
Steam fitter.
The problem was that people still got hung up on the property issue, and I sort of kidded myself into thinking that just by my writing a statement and turning myself into the police, I would like neutralize the property destruction angle. And yet I just found out literally how hung up people are on the whole issue of property, and they tend to protect property more in many ways than they're willing to protect liberty, and sometimes even more than they're willing to protect life.
No, I felt it was unnecessary destruction, but in a way he had a point, you know. I'm not really against him, I'm not really for him, I just, you know.
What was his point?
Well, to protect himself from, to protect himself in a natural environment from destruction and radiation and things like that.
He destroyed the goddamn thing that would tell us if the power plant is going to be built here or not.
Yeah.
That thing would tell you if the air current was right or not.
I feel that he put a lot of thought into what he did, and that he was trying to represent a lot of people.
I don't think it's right.
You don't?
No.
Why don't you feel it's right?
Well, because I think he did wrong by doing it.
I was glad to hear it myself.
You were?
Yeah.
Townsfolk, those that are aware of what reactors can do, were sort of for his action. Morally.
I don't like him myself. I don't like him, but that was nothing to do. Let's knock off that big tower. I don't like nuclear plants myself. I hate them, but what are you going to do?
On September 17th, 1974, the trial of Sam Lovejoy began before a jury and Judge Kent B. Smith in Franklin County Superior Court. Admitting that he had toppled the tower, he intended to present evidence showing his right, in his words, his duty, to take such action.
I had to lay out to them, one, the health dangers,
2, the fact that I had no recourse. And that 3, therefore, the only way that I could confront this society was to destroy a certain kind of property, a very special kind of property, this tower, and then I had to walk into court and say to those people, this man is not guilty of bad conduct. This man should be lauded for trying to stop an infernal machine. And so in my opening statement to the jury, I said to the jury, look, Sam Lovejoy does not care about his own existence. That the existence of Sam Lovejoy means nothing in comparison to future generations and in comparison to those real live people sitting in that jury box who had to confront themselves and say, I have grandchildren and I will have great-grandchildren and I might die, but I'll have great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. And all those people are going to be hung under a cloud, a dismal cloud. And I just had to tell people that the raw gamble that was being handed to the citizens of Franklin County and ask them if they wanted to send Sam Lovejoy to jail for 5 years when they confront his act with the nuclear power plant reality, the concept of jail, should this person go to jail.
Lovejoy soon put himself on the stand in his own defense. An attorney, Mr. Thomas Lesser, led him through the story of his life, tracing the long road that led Lovejoy to the Montague Plains that night. Was there one single thing, personally or in writing, that influenced you the most in your decision to topple the tower? Yes. Would you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that was? A little 4-year-old girl named Sequoia. I mean, it's like an existential question. I mean, who is Sam Lovejoy? Just Sam Lovejoy, a 27-year-old human being. Who is he to tip over a tower and stop a plant and be outraged? I kept saying to myself, is it me? Who am I? Do I have the strength, the responsibility? Do I have the right? Going back and forth constantly. But it was impossible for me not to tip over that tower and live in a house with 2 young children who had no control over their own lives. As his first witness, he called the author of Poisoned Power, Dr. John Goffman.
I was quite interested in this trial, and I felt that I have a moral and social obligation to testify at his trial. The issue is one of the greatest moral, social, and ethical issues of our times and of all times. And that is why I felt it imperative that I indicate my willingness to be here.
Although the judge listened to hours of compelling testimony from Dr. Goffman, he decided to withhold the testimony from the jury. Lovejoy next called Dr. Howard Zinn, professor of political science at Boston University, to testify on the history of civil disobedience.
Well, if my trial testimony had an essence, I like to think it did, it was about the necessity of civil disobedience in times of danger to life and liberty and health, and how historically in the United States we have seen many, many times how the ordinary institutions of government, those hallowed things presented to us in the 4th grade as the 3 branches of government, are really very inadequate in protecting us, as we've seen from the number of wars we've engaged in, from the number of people who have died in industrial accidents, from the number of people who have been exploited in this country by corporations. These governmental institutions have not been very adequate to protect people, and from time to time, when grievances became too deep, groups of people had to go outside the machinery of government, had to break the law, had to commit civil disobedience in order to dramatize something that was happening. This was done by the labor movement. It was done by black people at various points in our history, and before the Civil War and the Underground Railroad, in recent years in the Civil Rights Movement. It's been done by women in protesting against inequality. And it seemed to me that after the most recent acts of civil disobedience, that is against the Vietnam War, maybe the time is right now for people to look closer to home at the dangers to our lives posed by corporate control of our lives.
Well, civil disobedience has been with us for a great many centuries. I think one could go back into Christianity or other religions and find a great deal of civil disobedience. The difficulty with it is where you draw the line. What's right for you and what you believe is right for mankind, you may not share with me, and I may not share with you. I may not like your lifestyle. I may decide that where you live is endangering me, and I may go over and put a match to it and say, burn it down. I'll be very careful to go when there's no one home, but it would be, I think, wrong of me to do that, and I think perhaps it's wrong to destroy private property. I think there's plenty of opportunity for a full airing of this plant without having toppled that tower. And I do want to say that that is a very private opinion from an individual. My company has been very careful to take no stand on this and did not prosecute Mr. Lovejoy and did not appear in court. This was an action with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, so that is a private opinion. Very difficult line, civil disobedience. Good for Gandhi, but perhaps not good for then Adolf Hitler.
The process really has gone on for 100 years. That is, as soon as we began to have in this country what you call an industrial revolution, as soon as you began to have mines and mills and steam, and as soon as the companies began wiping out the forests, and as soon as they began pouring wastes into the rivers, we began to have an environmental problem, just the beginnings of it, but didn't pay much attention to it. And civil disobedience was directed at other things. Now, the enormity of what they are doing to us, the very air we breathe, the very water we drink, the very space we occupy, and now with the special dangers of atomic radiation and our kids and leukemia and all of that, the time is right for people who are against this to really do their act of protest for all of those people who in the past 100 years were not able to feel the issue deeply enough or did not have the capacity or the ability to do anything about it.
Civil disobedience or justification or a strong belief in what you were doing, therefore you're justified in breaking the law. I don't think there's just there's no basis for it in law, and there cannot be any basis for it in law. And there are some that believe that I have the right to do it and I should not be penalized for doing it. Well, I think that statement in and of itself shows that there's no place in the law for that type of defense.
The law is not a holy thing. I remember when Dan Berrigan broke the law and they interviewed his 80-year-old mother and they said, "Oh, what do you think about your son? What do you think about him breaking the law?" I guess they thought an 80-year-old woman would have 80 years of respect for the law behind her, and she'd give them the right answer. And Dan Berrigan's mother said, "It's not God's law." And she had it there. The law is made by very mortal people, very limited people, very opinionated people, and people who have very special interests. They make the law. They tell us what the law is, and then they act as if it's holy writ. So, it's not a terrible thing to break the law. I'll make the statement as simply as I can. Far more violence to human life has been done in human history by people obeying the law than by people breaking the law. The greatest acts of damage to human beings have been done in conformity with the law, in conformity with government edicts and government decrees. The greatest harm to people has been official harm, not the harm done by ordinary citizens.
During the trial, Lovejoy called several witnesses to testify to his character. Betty Bell, a retired librarian from a nearby town, had known Lovejoy through her work in the anti-nuclear movement.
Having been conditioned for 65 years to a strict law and order thinking, it was very hard for me to change my mind about the destruction of property, which I've always been led to believe was bad. But I think it was a catalyst. I think that it stirred people and shook them out of their apathy. And I also look back and read about the Boston Tea Party, the Shays' Rebellion, and I thought a lot about a black lady who refused to go to the back of a bus, and that really started the civil rights movement. And I came to realize that it may be unfortunate, but in this country so many good social changes have come out of rather desperate, drastic actions. So it changed my whole thinking.
A police officer has to look at civil disobedience as something that you shouldn't do, because the law takes a dim view of particularly destruction of property. There are many cases of where it has been destroyed with what people thought was sufficient reason, but it has to be with reason of something detrimental to other people, which is the idea that Sam was carrying out. It was not necessarily just detrimental to Sam, but to all mankind. I had a whole lot different view of disobedience after the trial. I cannot say that blanketly I agree with it, but I don't blanketly disagree with it.
Judge Smith had gone to great lengths to ensure a fair trial, partly because, as he noted at one point, this is probably one of the strangest trials ever held in Franklin County. One of the minor issues of the trial set Lovejoy free at an unexpected moment. He was charged specifically with the destruction of personal property, yet he had found and shown in court that the tower had been taxed and the bill had been paid as if the tower were real property or real estate. On the 7th day of the trial, the judge indicated that he might throw the case out of court because of this flaw in the indictment. The first person to argue against this was Lovejoy himself. The judge, however, was insistent in his desire to dismiss the case. At 2:50 p.m., Judge Smith called the jury in and instructed them to find Samuel Holden Lovejoy not guilty. In the days that followed the trial, the jury was polled by the local newspaper. They not only approved, by and large, of Judge Smith's decision, they also indicated that they thought the prosecution had failed to prove malice on Lovejoy's part.
Did you feel that the Commonwealth proved malicious intent?
They did not prove the point, no.
No.
That's the reason why I think that the jury would have acquitted him. The Commonwealth didn't prove the point that he was malicious when he did it. And I don't think he was. I don't think he's that type of man. He did that, in other words, he figured he'd sacrifice his own life, you know what I mean?
Right.
For the existence of the community in this area.
Right.
In other words, he was going to be the sacrificial lamb. You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't care what happened to him. All he cared about was just the community at large, the generation and the generation to come. I figure he should have been acquitted because the Commonwealth failed to prove that point. See? When you, on a case like that, you can't just acquit a man through sympathy. I mean, you can't do that. You have to weigh the balance of the law and the way the law goes, see me? And then you have to abide by that law. So the judge abided by that law, see? And I was really glad that he did what he did.
I always think that behind technical reasons in the court are substantial human reasons. And behind that technical decision of the judge based on is it real property, is it personal property, was a kind of moral pressure that the judge felt in the course of the trial put on him by the defendant and all the friends of the defendant, and the atmosphere of the courtroom and the feeling was that, by God, this was the right thing to do.
The environment must be protected, and life must be protected, and somehow we've got to be able to confront this all-pervading technology that's beginning to drown us with some counterbalance. And the judge kept saying to himself, my God, I've got an issue here so huge, how am I going to allow in this evidence? How am I going to confront these huge issues when this man's life is at stake? So he was like trying to protect my rights as an individual and yet try and get this whole issue of nuclear power somehow digested in his mind. And that confrontation in the judge was, I think, where we really won the trial, because he became convinced that not only was I sincere in my belief that nuclear power plants were bad, but that maybe even I was right in doing the act that I did.
People forget that when we fought that revolution 200 years ago, we fought it in the name of the Declaration of Independence, and the Declaration of Independence said, governments are instituted for the purpose of protecting life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That was the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Then when the revolution was over and they set up a new government and they wrote the Constitution, they did not use that phrase in the Constitution. They didn't say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They said life, liberty, and property. That tells you a little about the Founding Fathers and their interests. And in a sense, what we have to do in this country, of which this environmental action is part, we have to move that enormous distance, and also that short distance, from the Constitution to the Declaration of Independence. You could almost define where this country has to go by saying we have to move from life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
I mean, politics in America means freedom, liberty, life, and then property. Politics means people taking a political stand. It means a yes or no. It doesn't mean a bunch of foo-foo lobbying saying, no, I don't want this and I'll counterbalance this. There's no negotiation here. That's politics. That's saying there's no way that they can be built safely, and therefore there's no way they're going to be built. It's like saying we're going to have a safe war. I'm saying there's no safe wars. I'm saying there's no safe nuclear power plants either. These people are going to start to realize that, and when you take a concrete position, that's politics. When you take a social position and start to develop yourself as a social creature, that's when you get political. You're not a lobbyist anymore. You're not taking little negotiatory stands. You're saying no.
I think Sam was purely and simply concerned with what it would do to people in the final analysis if a plant is built on those plains.
And if the tower was toppled, it would give us a year to think it over, to learn and educate ourselves and, you know, have our eyes opened as to what the dangers were.
The time was awfully short in what we should decide as whether it was good for us or not good for us, whether it would bother us or not. The power companies had had years of research in this. They knew where they were going and what they were doing. We had not that background of knowledge. Therefore, we had to gain time. And I do believe in time that people will believe in this whole spectrum the same as Sam does, and it will not be built. I firmly believe that.
Light is not a ball, bird is not a plane. Sometimes things get so tangled that they need some dumb refrain, such as light is not a ball, bird is not a plane. If it's wet, it might be rain. It's so all-fired important, why can't you live forever? It's the same stuff that you're made of. You don't have to pull no lever. Energy, energy, oh my God, why can't they see? They just wrap it up and sell it like a soul. There's no more to be stolen. They might once again start rolling and end up where we Take it, madman.